The goal tonight really is to engage in a conversation around the process of the community survey that we're engaging. The board approved a survey process. Kevin Rains and his team from Corona Insights was the vendor that was chosen across the board. Kevin's going to spend some time. The first half hour tonight really is to give you guys some deep information about how the process goes, all the background, kind of their credentials, and how our goal really is to have a trustworthy process, an authentic process, an organic process that you guys will help shape. The next half hour really is about taking questions from you in the large group setting, that anything you want to talk about, if it's past things that might have happened, future things that you hope want to happen, this is what we're here for. The last hour will actually, from 7:30 to 8:30, we'll have open for small groups to get together to literally create questions and input to the surveys that will be developed again. So our goal really is to be hands-off at the district level. It's why we've got these guys. They're the experts. They're the ones that have done this over and over again. My role really is to facilitate anything that they need to get them going. So I book the room, or I get them water, and that's okay. So really, let me hand it over to Kevin and his team. I do believe he's going to use, well, you have a clicker tonight, and you're going to grab, but you're going to use this.
Facing the screen so that I can kind of make sure.
Yeah.
But
well,
so
I
I'll
think
probably hang out up here.
Okay. Well, I can hand you this mic, or you can use that mic. You decide. Okay. So this is Kevin Rains.
Sounds good.
Take it away.
Great. Well, great job, Jess, on the venue, and my water's really good. So. So I'm Kevin Rains. I'm the president of Corona Insights, and I'm going to be the project manager for the community research project. And I think it's known colloquially as the community survey, but it's actually a bigger process than that. So we call it internally the research project. So Jess kind of got us a little bit ahead of schedule on the agenda, because I think he already shared with you that. So what we're going to do is spend a little time telling you what we're doing. Then we'll take some time from you to ask questions, any questions you want to have about the process itself. And then we're going to break into these small groups so that we can actually get your input on what we should be asking. So first, I'd like to give you a little bit of an introduction about my company and the research team that you'll be working with. So I'm the president of the company and the founder. I've been there for 17 years. We've done about 1,300 projects, a little more, maybe closing on 1,400 in 44 states around the country. There's 10 of us full-time. And we're a little different than a lot of market research firms, because if you think about market research, a lot of times you think about, they're the ones that are like doing the Ford Focus focus groups. That was a really bad example, but the Chevy Impala focus groups, let's go with that. Or they're figuring out like the good box design for Lucky Charms or something like that. And we're a little bit different because we actually work with behaviors and policy issues. So our clients, we have a very small number of private sector clients, but most of our clients are actually government and nonprofit agencies. And in our sales pitch, we wrote a proposal and we did an interview to get hired for this. And in our sales pitch, that's one of the things we talked about is we are a research firm that works kind of in this area. So I pulled our client list at the time that we interviewed to win this contract. And I don't know if you can actually, you can kind of read it up there, but this is the types of clients that we work with. So you see nonprofits, you see a lot of youth projects, you see environmental projects, community surveys up there, arts and culture, that sort of thing. And this is kind of my brag sheet. So again, I pulled this kind of from our sales pitch when we interviewed, but we actually do our own research surveys of our own clients after we finish working with them. 97% last year said they would definitely recommend us. We've won the top market research award for the Colorado American Marketing Association 3 out of the last 5 years. We were a statewide finalist for the Colorado Statewide Business Ethics Award in 2011, and the Denver Metro Chamber named us their Small Business of the Year in 2009. And we're particularly proud of that last one because it's kind of a big deal. They actually send accountants into your offices and look at your finances, and they survey your employees and find out what kind of employer you are, and they go out and see kind of what's your community involvement and that sort of thing. So we are engaged in the community. The main team that you'll be, if you have any interaction with us directly, it'll be the three of us are going to be your main team. I mentioned I'm the president. I've been around for 17 years. I've got 23 years in the consulting world. And I specifically mentioned, again, this is from our sales pitch, I have experience with controversial and diverse topics. I'll do a little straw poll here. Does anyone think there's been any controversy in Douglas County Public Schools? Okay. So I think I was on target. I was on target with that part of our pitch. And then you can see I've done hundreds of surveys around the country on a really wide and interesting variety of topics. And my background, I've got a master's in public affairs. I'm actually a reformed engineer from way back. And I'll let the other two members of our team jump up and introduce themselves real quick, and they'll come up and talk a little bit later.
Good evening. My name is Kate Darwint. I'm a senior associate at Corona Insights. I've been with Corona almost 4 years. I have a PhD in psychology. I spent most of my life in school, so I'm excited to do research related to education. And I tend to work on the quantitative side of things at Corona, so specifically survey design, sampling, and I'm a huge statistics nerd.
Hi, everybody. My name is Molly Betcher. I'm also a senior associate here at Corona. No, unfortunately, I'm not with the Betchers, so while I like to pretend I'm rich and powerful, I unfortunately am not. I've been with Corona about 2 years, and while Kate focuses on the quantitative side, I am actually more on the qualitative side. I'm a trained focus group and interview moderator, so my full-time job is designing, conducting interviews and focus groups, and then analyzing the data from qualitative research. Prior to coming to Corona, I lived in the nonprofit world, and now I'm in the research world, so thanks.
So that's the three of us. I have to tell a quick story when we hired Kate, because Kate was like one of the easiest hires we ever made, because on our interview team, we had another principal in our firm. She's a social psychologist, PhD, cognitive psychologist, but I've kind of mixed up the specifics, but and she's been with us for a long time, and when we interviewed, Kate had basically the same degree and had the same responses to interview questions. And then at the end, we were like, what are your hobbies? And she said, knitting, which is the hobby of this other social psychologist who has exactly the same resume. We were like, we have to hire her. I mean, she's like the same person, it seemed. And you're a different person, but worked out great. So that's who we are. I'd just like to do kind of a quick introduction of who you are. So this is an employee town hall, and it doesn't really matter if you're not an employee, you're welcome as well, but is everybody an employee? Or raise your hand if you're an employee. So everybody's an employee. How many people have been here for, I'm just going to throw out a number, 5 years or less as an employee of the district? So about a third of you. How many have been here 5 to 10 years? Fair number. And you forgot for a second. Okay. Okay. It's that weird thing. We do this in survey design a lot too. It's 5 to 10, and then now I'm supposed to say 11 or more or something. Sounds good. We'll clarify that on the survey for you. And then how many 11 or more years? Wow, a lot of you 11 or more years. Great. And then, I'm still learning the terminology, so forgive me if I get it wrong, but there's teachers, and I've often heard it like staff, or is it classified, or non-teachers? What? Classified. Okay. So how many people are classified? So, well, pretty good showing. And how many people are teachers? So more certified. So it's certified versus classified. Okay, thanks. I'm learning the jargon here. Appreciate it. So I'll give you a little bit of a roadmap of what we're doing, and I'll start out with some big picture concepts, just because they're kind of questions that we would expect to get otherwise. So we'll kind of nail those at the beginning, and then I'm going to turn it over to Molly and Kate to give you a little bit more detail. So the first thing you want to do when you're doing a project like this is understand what your goals are. And part of this is, as step one of the process, we're trying to figure out what the questions are. You know, what are the things that we need to be asking in these various surveys? And that's part of the reason for the town hall is we want to hear from you what these issues are. So it's a little bit vague on what the research goal is in terms of content. We aren't saying that our goal isn't should we build this bridge or should we, open this whatever restaurant or something. Really, our goal is kind of the process itself. We really want to understand the opinions, priorities, and the perceptions of different constituency groups regarding public education. And you don't want to just develop a book of trivia when you're doing this as well. You want it to be things that can actually guide you in action going forward. So we said we need to have that as our second goal, just so that it's always in our heads as we're designing and implementing this, that it really needs to inform and develop future priorities and direction. So these need to be action-oriented data that we're collecting. I mentioned constituency groups, and so the question comes up of what is a constituency group? And so we sat down and we thought about who are all of the people that are affected by public education in Douglas County. And the obvious first one at 12 o'clock high on that graph is students. They are the consumers, so we want to hear from them where we're at. And then kind of the foundational element at 6 o'clock on this is the Douglas County School District employees. So you're obviously the two people directly involved in this system, but there are other constituency groups that are of course very important. And you've got these support groups, which is the parents, which obviously, and then you've also got there's probably a better way to put it, we're still trying to decide, but non-student households. So they're taxpayers, so they definitely have skin in the game on this. So we want to hear what their perceptions are as well. And then we thought later there's a downstream impact of people who have a role in public education. And when you think about students' careers, you've got some students that go off to higher ed, and you've got some students that go directly in the workforce. And we thought we want to hear from those two groups as well. We're hearing from them on the higher education. We're going to be hearing from them more at the beginning of the process to help us inform what we should be asking. And then at the end, we'll be talking more to the employers to help us understand what do all of these findings mean. But we did want to hear from those two groups. Confidentiality is a question that has come up, believe it or not, about research. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about how confidentiality works in our business and on this particular project. So when we conduct research, there's really kind of three levels that we can have in terms of confidentiality. And one is pure public. And so that's something like if we were doing research like this, and then we walked through and we said, okay, what's your opinion? What's your name? And tell us your opinion. It's pretty much non-anonymous. It's pretty much public. Everybody knows who you are and what your opinions are. That's really very seldom used in our industry for a variety of reasons. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got completely anonymous research. And completely anonymous research means nobody knows who you are. And that's like the things where, like, you go online and you just click a box on a survey there. But in the real, those are typically kind of like hobby types of research. And so when you're actually conducting something that you want to be defensible and accurate, the problem is you have no idea who's participating in the research. So you can't make corrections and you can't understand if they're really representative of the population. So that's actually pretty seldom used in professional research. And then in the third, you got kind of this big spectrum of confidentiality. And that's typically where we work, and that's where we'll be at on this project. And essentially confidentiality just means somebody in the world knows who responded. And in this case, that somebody is going to be the three of us, the research team. And the reason for that, and we'll talk a little bit later, but we'll be randomly selecting people to invite to one-on-one interviews. And if you participate, it's kind of hard for us to not know who you are, because we invited you and we're talking to you and that sort of thing. So we have to know that. On surveys, if we conduct a survey, we have to know who responded, just so we don't bug you with reminders and that sort of thing. We don't really care what you say. We just want to know if you responded or not. So that's kind of what confidentiality entails. And there are a number of other sub-elements of confidentiality, and if you've got questions about that, be glad to talk about those. And then public research versus public input, and I already kind of touched on this. We're doing a research process, and the reason you do a research process is you really want to develop accurate information that represents the views of the community or the constituency groups that you're with. If it's a public input process, sorry, got a gnat here. If it's a public input process, that's something like we've got here now. This is the first stage. This is the only stage of our project that's not actually research. This is input, and the reason it's input is because you all selected yourselves to come here. And so we don't necessarily know that you're going to be representative of the community. And the example I use on this is, if we had if the topic of this survey was, should we teach math in schools? And we held a town hall, we're going to get a whole lot of math teachers here. So you're not necessarily going to represent the entire community's views on math. So public research is something that we have to understand who we're inviting into the research and understand who we're trying to represent so that we can be most accurate about it. And we'll talk a little bit more. Our process has been evolving as we've been going. The distinction is a little bit less in some of these elements just because of the type of research that we'll be doing. And along the lines of that, essentially, and I'll kind of ask, we'll do a quick poll of hands. Is anybody involved in an element where you actually write grant applications? Anything like that? We got one person, okay, or there's 1.5. We got 1.5 over there. Or you respond to proposals, you like requests for proposals or something like that. The way it works in our industry, it's a little bit similar to grants, but we receive a request for proposals that says, here's what we're trying to accomplish. Give us your approach and your price for it. And that's kind of what happened on this process. So we gave what our best approach was. But the thing is, it's a blind process, so we don't know anybody. We can't really ask questions. We can't dig into the data and see what you've got. So we kind of take our best shot at it. And fortunately, our best shot was enough that we were selected for the contract. But then once you get into the process, then you start seeing, are there other things that we can do better? And in this case, we proposed a sample-based methodology that follows industry best practices, which is a good, solid research approach. Once we got in and started learning, a couple of things happened. We were able to start talking with our district contract and learning about the data systems. And I don't know if we have any classified staff here who work in data. You guys do a great job. We had really good data available. And then the other thing we did was we started doing these town hall meetings. And one of the things we heard very clearly was, we don't want a sample-based approach. We don't want you to sample a representative proportion of employees. We want every employee to be able to talk. Ordinarily, that causes us a problem because that balloons up a lot of costs and that sort of thing. But because you've got such good data systems and email systems, and we'll talk a little bit more about that because we want to be sure that we've got you down on that, we were able to make some changes, and Kate will be talking about that. So the overall process we've got is there's 11 different phases of the research that we'll be doing, and it's going to be happening over about a 7-month process. So we'll be finishing this up probably in February. We'll probably be doing presentations of the results in March. And it really falls into 3 main phases. And the first phase is what we're in right now, which is the design phase. And we're going to be talking to a number of different audiences, really to understand what we should be asking about, what information should we be trying to get in all of these various surveys. The second phase is actually the surveys themselves, which, and again, Kate will be talking about that, but it's actually a number of different surveys. It's not just one. And then the third will be really understanding what it means, because what happens is you conduct this research and you get your results, and what inevitably happens is a lot of stuff makes sense, and then there's some stuff that's just perplexing, where you don't quite understand why people are holding the opinions they are, and you want to understand it better. And then this phase is when we actually go out and try to draw those clarifications. So that's the big picture. I will turn it over to Molly now, and she will start you off on the approach phase, and then we'll move to Kate.
So as Kevin mentioned, the first phase of this is really the design phase. And the first part of that is these town hall meetings that we're doing now. We're doing 6 of them, 3 with employees and 3 with the general community. You're our 4th of these 6 town halls. And as you'll see later, we're going to be spending a lot of time really getting your input to understand what you think is important to the county and what you think will be important to be included on the survey. The second part of that is interviews with higher education officials. So our goal here is really to understand 2 things. The first is, what are colleges looking for when they're admitting students? So what skills and attributes do those students need to have coming out of high school to get into college in the first place? And then the second part of that is, what skills do they need to have coming out of high school to really make them successful in college into the future? So in this phase, we'll be interviewing higher education officials, both in-state and out-of-state, a mix of 4-year and 2-year programs, and private and public universities. The next part is we will be doing interviews with school board members. These are not required interviews, but we will be trying to contact all of the school board members to do interviews with them to get their perspective of the district from their position as elected officials. And then the final piece of this is, after we gather all this input from these various different sources, then we'll design a survey. But before we send the survey out to everyone, we do something called cognitive testing. And basically what that is we take a random group of people and actually have them take the survey. And again, the reason for this is twofold. One is just to measure to make sure that what we're asking in the survey is not confusing. So make sure that we're not using terms that people don't really understand, to make sure we're not asking questions that people have a hard time answering. And then the other part of that is to make sure that we're not asking any questions that seem biased or leading in any way. So when we do the cognitive testing, we'll be doing it with all of the groups that we'll be conducting surveys with. So we'll be doing it with parents, with employees, and with members of the general community that don't have students. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kate.
So I'm going to be discussing the measurement phase next. So as Kevin mentioned, we're going to be doing several different types of surveys, and the first survey that I'm going to talk about is the community survey. And also, as Kevin mentioned, our process has been evolving a little bit, both as we're learning more about your systems and discussing what's possible as well. So initially, we had proposed a mail survey to reach both parents and the community. And while we still have to do a mail survey to reach the community, because otherwise we don't have a list of emails for those people, what we're leaning towards now is potentially doing an online survey of all the parents in the district, because as Kevin said, we've heard that everyone would like a voice instead of just doing a sample. Ideally, we would hear from enough people from each group that we would be able to do comparisons, so comparisons of the community compared to parents of younger children, compared to parents of older children. We will also be weighting the data, so some people tend to respond to surveys more than other people. Some people just like taking surveys, and we want to make sure that our data are representative of what the actual population is. So if we hear from more classified than certified employees, we want to make sure that those percentages actually match the percentages for the actual population of employees. So that's what we mean by weighting. Next, we'll be doing student surveys. We had proposed doing 2 different student surveys. So the first is kind of like an exit survey for students. This would be done with seniors. It would be online again. What we heard in town halls is that some students would like to have a voice beyond just seniors, so now we're looking into whether these online surveys could be done with a larger number of the students, so potentially all high schoolers, potentially middle schoolers. We're still looking into what's feasible. We had also discussed doing some in-class kind of interactive data gathering. So basically, we would be coming into classes in the high schools to do a little bit of a mix of qualitative and quantitative research. Again, this is still a little bit in flux as we decide exactly what we're going to do. This may end up being more of a focus group, or it may be actual surveys done in the classroom. We're still working out what's feasible with students. Again, this would be weighted so that the data actually look like what the student population is. So if we hear from more 7th graders than we should have on average, we want to make sure that we weight the data so that it looks like the actual population of students. And then finally, maybe of most interest to this population, we'd like to do an employee survey as well. Initially, we had proposed doing just a sample of employees and doing it a paper version of a survey. But what we're leaning towards now is an online survey. And as Kevin mentioned, there have been concerns about confidentiality. So just to be clear, our online survey system is all done through us. So the emails come from us. The data, the survey is done on our servers. The data is stored there. Only we have access to that data. It's password protected. You have a unique login. You can only take the survey once. So we like to control that as much as possible so that we're producing the most valid and defensible data. Again, we would want to use weighting to correct for any differences that we see. So if we have too many 2nd grade teachers taking it, then what we would expect, we're weighting the data so that it matches the population. The final phase of our approach is understanding. So there are 2 main goals here. One, we may have some really surprising findings, and we just need to know more. We may find that there are certain things that are very divided, and we want to hear from people on both sides of the issues. If the data are pretty self-explanatory, we may use more of the survey, more of the interview time to get at what are next steps given this data. For all of the I'll go into this in a minute, sorry. So the first group I'll go over separately because they're kind of unique. We would like to do interviews with employers. So these would be employers that are in the district. We would like to target ones that hire directly out of high school since the students that you are producing have the biggest impact on them directly. We would like to do a random sample, various industries, just to get a sense of what they're looking for when they're hiring students directly out of Douglas County School District. The last 3 sets of interviews will be from the people who respond to the different surveys. So basically, at the end of each of the community, the parent, and the employee, the parent, the student, and the employee surveys, you'll be asked if you would like to participate in additional research. We will either randomly sample or perhaps sample depending on what we're looking for. If it's a very divided question, we might want to hear from both people from one side and people on the other. But either way, we'll be doing follow-up interviews to get a better understanding of some of the deeper issues and some of the findings from the surveys.